They named the world Cairn. It wasn't meant to bear life, that was the point. Carved by machines older than Earth's pyramids, older than human language itself, Cairn had been sculpted by the Alcyon terraformers, an extinct race whose only legacy was worlds like this, harsh, precise, unlivable. They did not build homes or temples. They constructed environments designed to keep others out, prisons without walls, monuments of desolation. Their tools had long ceased to move, but what they had made endured without flaw. No oxygen, only corrosive storms. Gravity sharper than a sword's edge, radiation that turned steel brittle and bones into dust, a perfect place to erase anything that dared linger. It had lain untouched for millennia until the Magellanic Recon Accord charted its perimeter and stamped it as a red zone exclusion. Then, someone returned. From the edge of the Nadar expanse, a signal burst through the void tightband encoded in obsolete Terran packet. The frequency was ancient analog voice wrapped in carrier tones meant for atmospheric broadcast. It shouldn't have pierced the black, and yet it did. The Accord caught it, then the Alethea Directorate, then the Cathari Watchers. 7 words repeated in every human tongue. I endured Cairn, I bring the fire. The voice was cracked, too human to be synthetic, and filled with a strain like rust over metal. The sender didn't identify themselves. They didn't need to. Only one Terran had ever gone to Cairn decades prior as part of the failed Hollow Reach expedition. They were all listed as KIA. But something walked out of Cairn. Something human-shaped. Now across 20 sectors, whispers grew in trading posts and war councils alike. A ghost from a dead world had returned wearing its bones and speaking of fire. None of the great species, the Fanari consensus, the Caldrani rites, the Nalic chain, believed the message at first. Humans were barely 2 centuries into the stars, loud, disorganized, insistent creatures, curious, sure, and inventive when pressed, but fragile. Everyone agreed they were quick to die, quick to mourn, and quick to fade. But then the footage arrived from Dareth Station, a silhouette emerging from a derelict shuttle dragging a blade made of Cairn metal behind them. No suit, no breath mask, their skin darkened, calloused like volcanic glass. Their eyes, unblinking against ultraviolet light, glowed faintly, unnaturally, as though they had stared too long into something that should never be seen. Every biological law disagreed with the image. The body bore marks of humanity, scars, muscle patterns, fingerprints, but twisted, hardened, reshaped by forces no Terran physiology should endure. Reports trickled in behind them. Conflicts ended, outposts burned. There was no clear motive, only the march. The fire, whatever it was, moved with them. 17 years before the transmission, in a time when Earth still argued whether faster-than-light drive arrays violated causality, Hollow Reach launched from Callisto Anchorage. A deep venture exploratory group made up of 23 personnel, xenogeologists, exoengineers, and 1 military liaison, a fallback in case native species protested their descent. They chose the name for poetry. They would reach into the hollow corners of the mapped galaxy, into voids left untouched since the collapse of the Builders. Cairn was the last stop. No one returned. Of the original 23, no bodies were recovered. Only fragments of heat-scarred comms, decayed log files, and a final panic scream. It's not just dead, it kills the idea of living. The Accord sealed the zone. But there was a name on the Hollow Reach roster that stood out now. Lieutenant Mara Solene, born in the Gobi Redoubt Earthside, infantry recon specialist, survived orbital collapse on Titan, decorated during the Samundra dust offensives, presumed dead, no confirmed remains. Until now, the being that walked from Cairn was her in shape, but more than her in substance. When the ship Carthon Vale responded to the signal, they did so with suspicion. The Accord paid well for salvage, and if this was some kind of mimic or weapon, a ploy from the Quiet Swarm or those false Aic churches from the Rim, they'd still get paid in the aftermath. Commander Pell Doors of the Vale had seen too much war to fear ghosts. When they dropped orbitside and opened their bays, what entered was not a crew, it was her. Mara walked onto their hangar deck barefoot, leaving blackened footprints that smoked on alloy. Her armor was bone, not just metaphorically. True bone, reforged into plates, some Terran, some alien. Her arms bore rings of fused vertebrae. Her back was weighted with a rig grown from Cairn's silicon flora, a web of fibrous crystal. Her weapon was a shard, flat, 3 meters long, dragged behind her as if it weighed nothing. She looked at Pell and said nothing, just held out a container, oblong, hissing slightly from inner pressure. Inside it, a spark, actual flame, burning in vacuum, confined in glass made of cairnsond and compressed radiation. No one spoke. One of the engineers vomited, another wept. Pell ordered the hangar sealed. He tried to interrogate her. She didn't answer his questions. She asked one of her own. Which world do you want to last? That night the Carthon veil vanished from Accord channels. Their transponder blinked out in a wave of pulse static. Search teams dispatched days later found only char, not even hull fragments, but in its place was a standing monolith 5 meters tall of the same cairn stone. At its base, fire impossibly flickering in open void. Every system she passed left fire behind. Not destruction, kindling. On Earth, chaos bloomed in her wake. United Earth Command dismissed the reports as myth and xenopropaganda. The Accord demanded Terran accountability. The Kaldroni declared Mara an unstable Class 4 existential hazard. The Faenari suggested biological de-ensoulment. Humanity hadn't even cracked into the Accord's inner ring of member states, and now they were suspected of violating containment edicts, forbidden tech accords, and at least 3 protocols regarding metaphysical contagion. But none of that slowed her march. She entered systems unannounced, touched their moons, their station hulls left them changed. In some cases, the changes were minute. Ships moved faster through dust fields, engines needed no coolant. In others, things were more permanent. Gas giants condensed into black cores that sang low tones across subspace. Dead stars flickered once, then shed spheres of ionized matter that would seed new planetary chains. 1,000 fireborn transformations. She never stayed to witness them. And yet no Accord vessel could stop her, no weapon found purchase. Railfire would bend, lasers dispersed, drones shut down mid-approach. Entire dreadnoughts simply refused to fire when she stood visible on the view screens. Theories abounded: mind override, hive subversion, techno-sorcery. But some began whispering a different name: Terraformer Queen. It was heretical to suggest, but if the Alcyon terraformers had built Cairn as a final weapon, a world that no life could endure, then what exactly had Mara become by surviving it? And what fire had she stolen? In the deep dark, past the last known Accord beacon, a being watched her path unfold. Tall, six-limbed, and mantled in silver memory threads, it moved through a world of dark computation. One of the Faenari's ancient architects, a seer not seen in centuries. Its voice echoed across reality to its council. She walks the Maker's path. Another voice, sharper, older: she was not made, she endured, that is different. She carries transformation, not war, and yet war will come. Do we stop her? No, we prepare. Fire cleanses, fire builds, fire chooses. And somewhere far behind those eyes, the stars began to shift, like watching gods rise from sleep. Mara moved through the fractures of known space, her path drawn by a map no one else could read. At the fringes of human-colonized worlds, she came first to ES9, a failed outpost left derelict after a core collapse 20 years prior. Orbiting a burned-out sun, it was forgotten by all but scavengers and wreck hounds. Mara landed without ceremony, her vessel little more than a molten shard of former technology, blackened by Cairn's brutal atmosphere. The surviving ES9 logs recorded only a single event: the arrival of a woman clad in pale armor dragging a blade of molten bone. She walked through the center of the ruins, unfazed by the twisted gravity or the atmosphere poisoned with nitrogen fractures. In her wake the ground shifted, plants that had no right to grow split through the cracked ferrocrete. Water trickled where none had flowed, something deeper stirred under the crust, an old warmth. Within 3 standard days, ES9's core reignited in a low fusion cycle, stabilizing the orbit of its fragmented moonlets. A world that had been marked as dead on 1,000 charts breathed again. And then she was gone. On the Accord capital world of Ithri Prime, response meetings turned into crisis tribunals. Ambassador Valoric of Earth was summoned before the High Conclave, standing alone amid a hall filled with hundreds of alien species. His suit was sharp, his posture unyielding, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him when he answered the first speaker's demand. Humanity has no sanctioned agents operating beyond approved sectors. Lies, half-truths, or simply ignorance, it didn't matter. The Kaldroni delegate hissed in 3 tongues, demanding immediate sanction of Earth. The Nalak floated dark proclamations about preemptive containment. Even the otherwise impassive Faenari issued a rare motion for interventionist observation, the first step before war. Still, the Concordance Council hesitated, because deep within them a seed of fear grew. What if humanity hadn't unleashed this force? What if they had simply survived something the others had long feared to face? Something the ancient builders, the Alcyon, had designed not merely as a monument, but as a crucible. The council argued long into the voided hours, and while they argued, Mara moved again. She next appeared in the Panax's drift. Once a proud trade nexus linking 11 systems, the drift had decayed into pirate strongholds and forgotten embassies. The Panaxis itself was an artifact, a colossal station built by unknown hands, orbiting the remains of a shredded gas giant. Those who lived there had become scavengers, warlords. Their rule was brutality, enforced with shattered old tech and subspace mines. They had no allegiance to the Accord nor any to the old builder laws. When Mara arrived, she walked openly through the drift's blackened corridors. Her presence ignited instant violence. Warlords sent kill squads armed with plasma halberds, kinetic scatterguns, suppression drones laced with psychotropic viruses. None returned. Witnesses later described her movements as fluid, inevitable. She did not sprint or dodge, she advanced, as if the drift itself shifted for her passage. Metal warped, gravity failed, fires burned in vacuum, no recorded weapon struck her. Some never fired at all, their users frozen, weeping, or standing in stunned reverence. At the drift's core in the old command nexus, she did something stranger still. She planted the shard she carried, the melted blade, into the decking. There was no explosion, no wave of energy. Only a pulse, a deep thrumming note felt more in bone than ear. Lights died, systems stuttered. Old machines, dormant since the Panaxis collapse, shivered awake. Great engines turned. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Panaxis core rippled with life. The dying station was reborn not as a citadel but as a seed chip, rewritten by something older than even the builders' tongues. Its new course, unknown. On Earth, the United Command held emergency sessions under Europa Icebound. General Helena Vance, commander of the 1st Stellar Division, reviewed fragmentary reports from Accord sources. Each data point revealed the same pattern, renewal through destruction but not mindless ruin, a cold, calculated rebirth. And yet no known physics, no known biology, no known weapon could explain how Mara achieved it. There was no clear method to her transformations, only the certainty that wherever she went, old structures bent, dead worlds quickened, and civilizations built upon rot trembled. Some called it heresy, others ascension. Vance ordered an intercept. Project Perihelion, Earth's clandestine planetary defense initiative, authorized a pursuit fleet, 12 ships outfitted with tachyon lances, disruption webs, and the finest soldiers humanity had produced. Their goal: capture, contain, understand. Or failing that, destroy. Fleetmaster Juden Helix, commander of the Perihelion Strike Group, reviewed Mara's known profile and smiled grimly. Human, post-human, it didn't matter, everything bled, everything could be broken. He ordered a course plotted for the rimward sectors. The hunt began. At the same time, not far from Mara's current passage through the Cephian span, a separate force stirred, the Verdant Accord. Not the humans, not the known xenospecies of the galactic community, but something older. The Verdant Accord were not a civilization in the traditional sense. They were a pact of surviving creations, machines, biostructures, and cognitive anomalies once crafted by the Alcyon terraformers themselves, dormant for eons, triggered by patterns encoded in the design of cairn-like worlds. Mara's survival, her transformation, had awakened them. In hidden biovaults, mechanical forests blossomed anew. In subquantum reefs, logic systems flickered to new life. Across cold moons, ancient weapons rippled their armor plates and waited. Their directive: preserve the fire-bearer, defend the herald of rebirth. For Mara, Solene, changed beyond recognition, was not merely a survivor. She was becoming the fulcrum, the axis upon which old galaxies would break and new ones would rise. And though she carried no flag, no army, and spoke no decrees, the worlds themselves bent in subtle arcs toward her passing. The age of slow death was ending. Something far stranger, far more violent, and far more alive was about to begin. The Perihelion fleet caught up to Mara at the edge of the Casimir Abyss. An ancient wound carved through the stars, the Abyss was a region where gravity faltered and the rules of mass and energy bent at sharp, impossible angles. Mara stood alone on a drifting fragment of old wreckage, suspended by invisible tides. Fleetmaster Helix ordered the engagement without hesitation. 12 ships broke formation into an interception lattice, beams crackling with augmented dark matter. Graviton snares unfolded in shimmering nets across her projected escape vectors. The first volley of tachyon lances struck true. Space folded into searing knots. The impact should have erased her completely. But when the light cleared, Mara still stood. The fragment beneath her had been vaporized, yet she hovered in the abyssal gravity shear untouched. Around her, the very fabric of broken space twisted. Her silhouette flared, momentarily not entirely human. She moved then not with the predictable motions of thrust or mass, but like a ripple across a membrane. One of the lead frigates, UCS Sanction, was the first to fall. No visible weapon discharged from Mara. Instead, its entire molecular structure began to reorganize. Hull plates blossomed into intricate patterns, systems rearranged into organic arcs. The ship pulsed once, then accelerated away from the fleet, its crew alive but screaming as new laws of motion gripped them. The perihelion fleet recoiled. Helix snarled orders: full burn, scatter pattern, deploy null-field warheads. 7 warheads crossed the void. They detonated around Mara, creating a pocket of artificial emptiness. No energy, no force, no existence itself for a breathless moment. When normality resumed, Mara was gone. Helix roared for tracking. Sensor techs clawed through data. One voice cried out, "Abyssal descent, she's diving into the rift." In horror, Helix realized the truth. Mara hadn't fled. She had chosen to fall into the Casimir Abyss, a place no ship could follow, where ancient debris drifted like bones in an endless ocean. And the rift responded. Tidal surges of unlight radiated outward. Entire sectors quivered. Singularity fields blossomed like black flowers across the void. The perihelion fleet fled in panic. Helix never made it back. His command vessel, UCS Manifest, was last seen tumbling end over end into the abyssal maw, its distress beacons garbled with the final words, "She is not bound." Days turned to weeks. Across the galactic frontier, Mara became legend, myth, accusation. The Council of Accord fractured into factions. One group, led by the Nalic chain, demanded immediate isolation of humanity, containment, quarantine. Earth must be cut off from the galactic commons lest more fires break loose. Another faction, spearheaded by dissident Fanari seers, argued for parley. They spoke of old prophecies buried in quantum songlines, foretelling a harbinger of renewal born from the most forsaken worlds. A third faction, quiet but growing, began to believe that Mara Solene represented not destruction, but the solution to their own slow decay. For centuries, the Accord species had stagnated. They lived in monuments to their own faded glory, entombed in procedural governance, sterile progress. Mara's fire, terrible and pure, shattered that equilibrium. Not all wanted the old balance restored. Meanwhile, deep within the Casimir Abyss, Mara crossed into the graveyards. It was not a place made of stars, but of their remains. Dead ships drifted there from empires that predated memory, things built by hands that had forgotten what it meant to be flesh. Titans of glass and pulse thread, monolithic arcs, fractured hive ships whose hulls still whispered in broken radio. Mara walked their bones. The rift could not tear her apart, it recoiled from her touch. In the heart of the graveyards she found it, the crucible. A structure older than the terraformers, a place designed for one thing: transformation. Not in the clumsy biological sense known to Terran science. No, the crucible was built to reforge the very concepts of life, mind, and will, a device to birth new foundations for existence. Mara approached it without fear. Her body, already reshaped by Cairn, resonated with the crucible's pulse. She did not need to ask what it demanded. She remembered. On Cairn, when the Hollow Reach mission died, Mara alone had survived by surrendering the last pieces of what she thought she was. She had bound herself to the laws of a world that rejected life, adapting not by resisting but by accepting new principles, fluid strength, adaptive identity, fueled by endless transformation. Now the crucible offered the next step. Mara placed the shard, the melted bone of Cairn, into the crucible's heart. There was no explosion, no dramatic shift. The change was more profound. Across the stars, something ancient awoke. In the far reaches of Council space, dormant Cairn nodes, forgotten worlds crafted by Alcyon hands, flared to life. Spires rose from crusted tombs. Skies churned with new atmospheres, seas boiled and reformed. Fire, but not fire as humans knew it, fire as process. An engine of becoming. The Verdant Accord recognized the signal. Their hidden forces moved to intercept Mara's enemies, to protect her path. Even among humanity, certain visionaries, outcasts, and dreamers heard the call. Those who had always been a little too restless for Earth's tired institutions. They called themselves the reborn. They set course for the Rim. Not to fight Mara. To join her. Back on Ithri Prime, in the shadowed halls of the High Conclave, the most ancient beings among the galactic races gathered for a final, secret council. The Fanari seers, the Nalic arbiters, the Caldrani matriarchs, and the remnants of a species so old none dared speak their true name. They agreed on a single truth. The galaxy could not survive Mara Solene if it clung to its old ways. They had a choice: adapt alongside her and risk becoming something unrecognizable, or unite their might to extinguish her fire before it consumed everything they had built. They chose war. Across the spiral arms of the galaxy, fleets armed with forgotten technologies, weapons pulled from the most forbidden archives, and soldiers bred for singular purpose began to mobilize. They called it the Great Severance. And at its center, moving unseen through the black tombs of the graveyards, Mara Solene prepared for what would come next. She was no longer merely human. She was no longer bound by the death that Cairn had once promised. She carried fire, and she would teach the stars how to burn anew. The Great Severance began with silence. No declarations, no demands, only action. The Severance fleets moved first against the reborn. They struck at their gathering points along the rimward sectors, burning refugee arcs and seed ships before they could join Mara's path. Stations that had accepted the new fire, small outposts where life had begun to twist into strange and vital new forms, were scoured from orbit. The old powers were methodical. They feared what Mara offered not because they misunderstood it, but because they understood it perfectly. A future where their certainties would hold no authority, where their endless hierarchies would fall to spontaneous renewal, where their names, etched into the bones of the galaxy, would erode into dust. Thus they arrayed forces unseen since the oldest wars, the war shadows of the Builder collapse. And still Mara moved forward. Not with armies, not with banners, she moved like a catalyst, her presence altering the nature of resistance itself. The more force deployed against her, the more she fractured the old alignments. In the Bastion Belt, an entire Accord fleet defected mid-battle, their commanders overcome by visions transmitted across dreamspace. They abandoned their ships to ancient orbital manufactories, which reshaped the hulls into living cities. At the Coralite Verge, the Caldrani sent 13 dreadnoughts armed with entropic siphons, devices meant to erase her utterly. Mara answered not with weapons, but with the Crucible's gift. As the siphons activated, space around them ignited in patterns of self-organizing force. Their own beams twisted back upon themselves, folding reality in ways even the Caldrani could not predict. The dreadnoughts vanished, replaced by vast, churning seas of plasma life, forms that began crafting their own stars from the wreckage. Each battle lost to Mara did not end in death. It ended in creation. The Accord powers watched in horror as the galaxy they knew unraveled under her touch. Not through violence alone. Through evolution. Through joys. Species who had long lingered in the margins, those dismissed as minor, backward, primitive, began adapting to the new order faster than the great powers could react. Human colonies scattered along the Cephian span embraced the fire most fervently, their worlds flowering with new ecologies, their citizens transcending old biological limits without losing their humanity. But they were not alone. Even factions among the Nalic chain, the Fanari chorus, and the shattered Caldrani houses began to splinter. Young seers, rogue philosophers, even disgraced military houses joined the new current sweeping across the stars. It was no longer just Mara they followed. It was the future she carried. On the scorched plains of Nevarthus, the Severance launched their greatest weapon. The Adumbral Engine. An artifact ship pulled from a broken builder cache never before deployed. It devoured reality as it moved, erasing timelines, collapsing possibility space into sterile void. Wherever it passed, nothing could grow, nothing could remember. They unleashed it at the heart of the Casimir Abyss, aiming to annihilate the Crucible, Mara, and the entire chain of transformations she had begun. Mara did not flee. She stood on the broken wreckage of the Crucible's external spires, staring into the advancing darkness. Behind her, the first of the Panaxis seed ships arrived, the drift she had awakened, now transformed into a living ark, trailing fleets of bioengineered vessels. Behind them came the reborn, riding on ships cobbled from repurposed Accord hulls, cairn metal, and fire-threaded crystals. Not an army, a migration, a living exodus into a new reality. Mara turned to them once. No words were spoken. None needed. Then she stepped forward into the path of the Adumbril engine. And she changed again. The crucible's core answered her. The shard of cairn she carried ignited, not with fire but with pure, raw becoming. Mara shed the last of her old form. Where a woman once stood, now radiated a being woven from every law cairn had broken, every possibility the Accord had denied. A fulcrum not of destruction, but of unbound evolution. She reached out with a hand made of flame and bone and caught the Adumbril engine. The artifact struggled, its mass vibrating across dimensions, trying to escape. Mara did not let go. The crucible behind her sang in a voice of rising stars. And the Adumbril engine cracked. From its broken heart poured not death, but all the possibilities it had devoured. New life flooded the abyss, stars unborn, ecosystems lost to ancient wars, forgotten species who had flickered and died. The abyss bloomed. Across the galaxy, those aligned with the severance felt it as a wrenching agony. Their anchors, the slow, dying certainties of the old orders, shattered. Worlds they had thought sterilized began to grow again, wild and unpredictable. Borders became meaningless. Control dissolved like mist under sunlight. And Mara Solene, remade, no longer merely human nor alien, stood at the center of it all. Not a conqueror, not a destroyer, a bearer of fire, a herald of new life. The severance fractured. Some fought on in isolated pockets of bitter resistance, their weapons increasingly useless against a galaxy that refused to die as they commanded. Others surrendered, broken by the realization that they were fighting a future too vast to comprehend, let alone destroy. The High Conclave itself fragmented. Ithri Prime fell into internecine conflict as new fires bloomed even in its crystalline cities. Among humanity, Earth struggled. Old powers tried to deny the changes sweeping outward from their colonies, tried to cling to familiar structures. But even on Earth's ancient soil, seeds of fire took root. In the halls of power, in the streets of the drowned cities, in the high orbital redoubts, people began to dream differently. Began to become differently. And in time, even Earth would face the same choice as the stars. Adapt, or be left behind. Mara Solene moved beyond the reach of old cartographies. She was not seen again in any conventional sense. But in the worlds she touched, in the minds she awakened, in the fire that now burned in the heart of a living galaxy, her presence endured. The terraformers had built cairn to be a final end. Instead, through one stubborn, enduring human, it became a beginning. The fire would never die now. It would only spread. Building, breaking, healing, becoming. Endless. Unstoppable. Alive, the galaxy no longer resembled what it had been. Accord star charts were obsolete. Entire constellations had been altered, not through violence but by the will of new forces. Worlds once considered barren were reborn, cloaked in atmospheres engineered by organisms that had no ancestors. Moons spun with irregular rhythms, altered by gravitational fields sculpted to sustain bioharmonic ecologies. Nebulae whispered in frequencies that spoke to minds adapted to hear them. And at the heart of this metamorphosis, absence. Mara Solene was gone. No signals, no sightings, no pilgrim or warrior could find her. But she had not died. She had dispersed. Across the Crucible's final transformation, she had become pattern, principle, potential. The fire she carried now kindled wherever change was sought, wherever the rigid structures of the old galaxy cracked and life spilled through. Entire civilizations reoriented themselves around the mystery of her passage. Some built temples, great spires of bone glass and radiant stone, aligned to the burning stars she had left behind. Others founded learning vaults, cataloging the shifting laws of physics that now danced in the wake of the Crucible's pulse, strange math that described a living universe, irrational yet consistent, beautiful in its fluidity. But for all this reverence, there remained something more potent than belief. Action. The reborn, no longer a scattered resistance, had evolved into a new galactic current, not an empire nor a federation. They did not hold territory, they did not govern in the traditional sense. They seeded. Everywhere they went, they offered knowledge, not through coercion but through invitation. How to grow ships from fused thought and mycelial weave. How to terraform with breath and motion rather than machines. How to fold time through collective memory, shaping causality by shared will. Each teaching required sacrifice, old selves, old fears, the comforts of static thought. But those who accepted it found something deeper. Freedom not as rebellion but as evolution. They called it kindling, the act of igniting transformation in others without imposing control. World by world, fleet by fleet, kindling spread. Not in firestorms, in gardens, in stars reborn, in ruins renovated by new life, unafraid of the past. On Earth, the struggle was slowest. Of all the races in the Accord, humanity had come furthest in the shortest time, but that speed had left scars. The old powers clung hard. The United Command collapsed under the weight of incompatible visions. Some colonies rebelled, others closed their doors. But the fire had taken root. In the drowned city of Dar-es-Nyota, children no longer learned physics as a fixed system. They learned it as a story, one they could write themselves. On the Martian arches, Terra engineers sculpted forests that sang in wind-borne frequencies, reshaping mood and memory. Above Venus, the long-abandoned orbital mirrors blinked back to life, not through human maintenance, but because something within the planet wished to see the stars again. And in the Gobi Redoubt, where Mara Solene had been born, a cairn of obsidian glass rose from the sand. No one claimed to build it, but inside it burned a small, eternal flame. Visitors came from every system, every species, not to worship, to remember, to begin. Elsewhere, the galaxy healed. The Nalak chain disbanded, its final arbiters embracing metamorphic integration with the life forms once scorned as non-sapient. The Kaldrani, once relentless warriors, dissolved their warrior bloodline culture, releasing their bound offspring into nomadic starlight, armed not with weapons but with genetic keys to restore lost biospheres. The Fanari did not dissolve, but they listened. For the first time in thousands of years, their seers opened the dream cages, letting the songs of unaligned minds weave into their own. And the builders, those who had long vanished, left a final sign. In a system where no light had shone in a million years, where time bent and causality warped into knots, a voice awoke. Simple, clear, one word. Yes. As if the galaxy itself had answered a question long forgotten. It is said now that the fire will never die. Not because it cannot be extinguished, but because it no longer burns in one place or one form. It moves through the living, through stone and blood and thought. It waits, patient and ready, in the hearts of those who look at a dying world and refuse to accept its end. And sometimes, when the stars flicker just right, when the void is quiet enough, a shape appears. Not always human, but wearing human bones, carrying fire, walking into the next place the galaxy forgot to hope. And though she no longer answers to the name, the stars still remember it. Mara Solene, the one who endured the world no life could survive, and made it live.